Okay, so we're going to do another. This one's probably going to be a little shorter because some of these I'm going to try and group because I don't want to just have a huge swing from one thing to another. Uh, Aestheticism, so Aestheticism, which is different than aesthetics. I'm going to go over both, which is also different from. There's a different sort of level of what you might hear aestheticism, and it sounds very similar. And that there's the other one. It's almost like a religious quality to it, and those are aesthetics are going to be different from the one I'm going to talk about here, but those are going to be also sort of like hyper religious individuals who kind of give up everything and live in a cave and meditate in a robe and eat gruel all the time and stuff like that. So they're stripping everything out and across and down from their lives and just barreling right into this very sort of hardcore, spiritual religious practice. It's a little bit different that we're going to talk about with these two here. So both of these are going to have to deal in these, the aestheticism and aesthetics I'm talking about with this are going to deal with basically art and our relationship with art. Um, Sorry, half my face is collapsing. So I don't, again, these might be terms that you just might have to be familiar with for the test. It also might come up in some sort of aspect in terms of the social studies and history classes. So aestheticism first with this is from the late 19th century. It's an art movement. So late 19th century means 1800s. And it's the idea of art for art's sake. So in the previous video we talked about being able to understand things within the time frame with which they were created. So, there's the comic book The Watchmen. I don't particularly like it, but it was when it came out in like the 80s. It was sort of a revolutionary comic book because it was very different than things that had come up before it, especially in terms of superheroes. Now it might be a little sort of like, oh, God, Free Daniels. But at the time, it had a very important sort of thing going on. So this would be a reaction from, sorry, very be considered a stuffy Victorian notion. So Victorian Age is the time with which Queen Victoria was the queen in England and the United Kingdom. So, mid to late 19th century, she was queen for a very long time. And this is, so think of it too, almost like if you look at music trends. So you have, um, like the hippie stuff that was kind of like dirty and shaggy and stuff and everything in like the 60s and late 60s, and that started giving over more to sort of disco, which is a little slicker, much more produced, clothes, hair, all this stuff different. And as disco sort of comes up, that's when the counter to that starts coming up. You start getting punk, and you start getting like the early things of like hip hop, and like metal really starts, heavy metal really starts coming out, and those are almost reactions to each other. And then, that sort of bottoms out in the 80s, start looking a different way. You start getting new wave and like hair metal and everything like that, but in like glam. So even though there's kind of metal, there's a lot of accoutrements and stuff and big hair and fancy outfits and everything. New wave did that too. And then, late 80s, early 90s, you start getting grunge, which strips all that back down again. And hip hop was kind of going in a certain way, and then you start getting, West Coast stuff starts coming in, and that starts changing the parent. So you're always going to have these things with culture and society kind of going back and forth. We're a reactionary culture in Western culture. We don't tend to take new things and synthesize and make that part of it. We tend to react. So if something went one way, we have to go the other. If after that way, then we have to react to it the other way. We can't kind of make something together with it. So with this is in the Victorian times, things were they needed to be extraordinarily proper. Necklines and things up to here. The clothes were very sort of stiff and had to be a certain way, and behavior had to be very a certain way, and art needed to the idea of it had to have a purpose. It had to have a function. It had to teach something, or it had to be uplifting. It had to be, they talk about being socially and morally beneficial. So if there wasn't a function to it, and again, this is also coming out of, the earlier part of that century was in the Industrial Revolution. So now all of a sudden everything has this mechanical sort of thought to it. And that idea even goes into sort of science. It goes into the culture of materialist reductionism. So the idea of, unless you can touch it or feel it or see it, then it doesn't exist. And this is a reaction also, people throwing away anything spiritual, because it wasn't it wasn't material. It wasn't something we could touch, we could see, we could manipulate, we could make money off of. So the same thing would have went for art. Things had to have a certain function to it. They had to teach that, or they had to be uphold a very strict, and some might argue even, impractical sort of moral values. And also you have to pay attention to, if you're super strict one or the other, there's still human nature that has to be accounted for, and I think a lot of things, even if we start getting into certain, economic philosophies and everything like that, there's a lot of times human nature isn't really taken into account, or if it is, it's a sort of almost diseased proportion of it. Diseased, not disease as in oh, cough cough, sick sick, actual virus, but diseased as in without ease, being traumatized in some way. But if you don't deal with those things, that sort of, Jungian shadow self or anything, stuff's going to come out. It's going to come out not in a healthy way. So this is reaction to that. The aestheticists in this case would say that there doesn't need to be a reason for the art or the work or the piece except for it to exist for itself, or if it's just beautiful over itself. It's a rejection of utility. It's the idea of form over function instead of function over form. If you have any exposure to the author and playwright Oscar Wilde, he talks about this. A lot of the, sort of more sort of characters that you might enjoy in the plays, um, will sort of promote this maybe without saying it. He also wrote a book called The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is very good. I highly suggest it. And in that, they even still blatantly do have these conversations about aestheticism and about that idea of something is beautiful and that has an intrinsic value in and of itself. And you don't have to create something just to make it work for something. It can be its own sort of thing. But that idea of once you do create it, say you're a painter, using the picture of Dorian Gray. If you're a painter and you put your painting out there, to a certain extent, the relationship with that has changed because other people have a relationship to it too. Think about a television show or a movie or a song that you might like. Now all of a sudden you're used to it from maybe, you grew up hearing it, you grew up hearing a song, you grew up watching a movie or something like that. You really enjoyed it. Now all of a sudden, because we can't have any novel ideas anymore apparently, everything's getting rebooted, getting remade and everything else like that. Now all of a sudden, people who, go 20 years in advance and you're hearing some some sort of upstart musician cover the song that you really like, and it's very different, and everyone else is thinking, oh wow, man, they made a really good song, and maybe this is something that blows up their career and in a good way, not destroys it, but puts them on a level or something like that. And then, I've seen one thing where I think it was Killing Me Softly, and everyone was like, oh wow, it's nice that the Fugees let this like older woman sing with him. I'm like, that's the person who did it originally. They covered it. So and you have that emotional reaction to it. If there's any Star Wars fans out there, the people who grew up with the original trilogy and then get the prequels and stuff like that are like, what the hell are you doing? George Lucas going back and taking the original trilogy and then, changing the voice actors in some things, changing some of the, I understand sort of updating, cleaning up the special effects, but when you blatantly change the voice actor or something, Boba Fett, for example, the couple times you hear him talk to Darth Vader, he's almost just basically like thumbing his nose at him. Like, I don't give a crap if you're Darth Vader or not. Shut up, pay me, dude. But then they changed the voice actor to match the person that he was in the prequels, and that actor is just sort of like, yeah, okay, sure, fine, whatever. It's like, that's not the character. Like, you spent 30 years making a character a certain way just to just blow it out of the water, because now he released that, and your relationship with that piece of art has changed. The aesthetics of it, that art for the sake of the art, now has a relationship with you that then starts becoming, an emotional aspect to it. And that actually brings us into the aesthetics, which is the study of the nature of beauty and of art. So it might not even just be art. It could be, the way, you walk past my grandma's house has some tulips. And this very nice looking tulips, and the way the color is and everything. So the aesthetics would be kind of the study of that thing and how beautiful it is, or, a piece of art. It is Greek for sense perception, so it actually has like a Greek meaning, as a lot of these do. So I'm kind of shifting from one of these segue. It was coined originally by, I don't think you're going to have to know this, but you might have to know a time frame or something for this. It was first by a German named Alexander Baumgarten, mid 18th century, so 1700s. It was revolutionized by Immanuel Kant, or Kant, if we're in America or Ohio. Kant should be Kant, not Kant. I know we say Toledo and Detroit and Milan, but it's Immanuel Kant. Now, the reason why I added this is because you might have to know Immanuel Kant. When he comes up in line, I'll talk about him a little bit. But he is someone who's kind of made a mark on certain things. So when he wrote about it, he shifted the view from considering beauty to the nature of the artist, the role of art, and the relationship between the work and the consumer. So as I was talking about that segue with Oscar Wilde of, when someone releases a piece, if you write a book, and now all of a sudden, and this is one of the things that ticks people off when now books become movies or TV shows or something like that. I read the book of, fill in the blank growing up a bunch of times, and now they're making a movie on it. I'm a little worried because the person they got as the main character looks like an idiot. He doesn't look anything like the description of the book. If you grew up reading, a lot of like comic books or something like that, you might see Keanu Reeves as John Constantine as being insane. Because it's like, and there's something about having, a blonde British guy in a beige trench coat doing all sorts of magic and creepy stuff and crazy stuff, as opposed to it being dark-haired, dark-clothed Keanu Reeves just talking about angels and demons. It's like, if you grew up with that, that was your thing. It was like, this isn't it. Or Game of Thrones. If you read the Song of Ice and Fire books and everything like that, I know the books stopped and the show kept going beyond the books because George R. R. Martin hasn't finished the books. He would. You read the books, you watched the show, the first couple seasons, okay, and then there are some things you have to suspend disbelief. You have to talk about, okay, well, there are changes that do have to be made to make it a TV show or a movie, but now all of a sudden it's like, well, this is not at all what the person was like. You like the Harry Potter movies. There's a reason why, you know, a couple of the movies there in the middle, especially Goblet of Fire, the movies aren't really that good because the book is this thick, and they try to put a 700-800 page book in an hour and a half or less. It's like, oh, you took out too much, changed too much. This isn't the same thing anymore. Especially with a different actor as Dumbledore, who's screaming at someone, even though in the book it says, asked him calmly. You have, I love Avatar: The Last Airbender, the cartoon. Love the show. The movie, the live action movie that M. Night Shyamalan did was utter horrible. Because you try to fit 22 20-minute episodes into less than an hour and a half, and you change the main sort of things. It's like the one character, Aang is super happy, like crazy little monkey boy sort of thing. Everything else like that, and all they did was just the cherry pick the times when he was all angsty. It's like, so your relationship with that thing, your aesthetic relation, you can be studied with that those things can be looked at and thought about. And philosophize means lover of wisdom. These are things that you can talk about and examine. You talk with your friends, people talk online all about it and everything else like that. So when you do that, or you like a video game, then they make a movie based on the video game, but the movie is garbage and the video game is cool. When you're doing that, when you're talking about your relationship with books, movies, music, painting, sculpture, um, even if it's flower arranging or something else like that, they have you're talking about aesthetics. You're actually philosophizing when you do that. So later on, it also talked about the artists and their free expression and the suspension of disbelief, which I mentioned earlier. So if you watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Commando, you have to have a certain amount of suspension disbelief to be able to watch that movie, because there's no way that a dude's getting killed when you throw a circular saw blade at them. No, you might nick them and it's going to bounce off, but it's not going through layers of skin, muscle, viscera, and even bone to damage, anything that it would damage to such a point where you're being killed by that. Arnold Schwarzenegger, for as big and strong as he was, is not throwing a flimsy HVAC pipe through a somewhat maybe more heavy set individual through not only layers of skin and muscle in the front of them, layers of skin and muscle in the back of them, organs, spine, bone and the sternum and the costals and the ribs, spine, as well as organs, and abdominal muscles will be, tend to be kind of stronger. You use them all the time, no matter if, you got ripping six pack or not. Let alone layers of subcutaneous under the skin fat, and spine, and through however thick that water heater or whatever was behind him to be able to blow out steam from it. If you're gonna, if you just overanalyze every frame of every movie and TV show or whatever with that, it's not a suspension of disbelief, and you're probably not going to have a good time with things. Um, so later on, as you start getting into the 20th century and things, we talk about a certain detachment from the piece to avoid getting caught up in the work, and the meaning going on a subjective response. So it kind of almost goes back. Again, we're going to have repeating cycles and trends where now we're talking about it where you take out the individual reaction from it. So without saying it, it does almost start sounding almost mechanical again. Um, to me, that sort of defeats the purpose. I mean, supposed to get some sort of meaning and reaction and response from art. And a lot of times you look at paintings, like, oh, great, this, how come these 15 paintings all have an old dude with a book and a skull? Well, there's symbolism in there. And yes, there needs, again, to be sort of a meeting of the thing. Everyone, a lot of times, and you'll probably find this, and this is an example of that, where we will do an all or nothing. Again, our reactionary thing, where it's got to be subjective, it's got to be objective, it's got to be this. We can do both. You can synthesize both. You can have an emotional reaction to a piece of art, which would also, it doesn't have to mean painting. It could be sculpture, it could be a movie, it could be a music, a song or an album. It could be a painting if you want it to be a painting, or a book, even comic books. I think comic books do a great thing in a lot of ways too. So you can, sit down and be like, okay, well, if you take a movie, cinematography wasn't great, lighting seemed off, the editing seemed to skip a little bit, so the continuity was a little weird. This one person really wasn't that great. But I think overall, I really liked the movie. It was like some of the stuff, like fight scene was cool, or something along those lines. So you can you can have that, okay, objective, logical look at things, but then still be able to appreciate things in a symbolic and emotional sort of way too. I think that's one of the reasons why, sort of bad movies or something like that still are kind of fun, as long as they are within a certain sort of spectrum. Let's be honest. So not all bad movies are created equal. Some bad movies are just freaking bad, man. Some of them are like, all right, this is a bad movie, but I really enjoy watching it. It might be just because your relationship with it, again, the aesthetics, talking about your relationship with it, has been because it was something that you watched when you're 4 or 5 years old. So you get that sort of Jesuit thing. You get the person before they're seven, and that influences later on things in life. So it could be really cozy to you. It could be, it might be a bad movie, but you watched it with like a parent or an older sibling or a grandparent or something like that. So you have that memory. Then you go back and watch it when you're more thoroughly an adult, 27, 28, 30, 40 years old, and you're like, I still kind of like it though. You kind of get that response from it. But there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it behooves us to be able to do both of what we've been talking about with these aesthetics. And I think it's something that can then also go in beyond just movies and TV and songs and everything, but also in terms of how we deal with people, how we deal with our jobs, how we deal with our life, how we interact even with ourselves. Because I don't think there's enough focus on how we're able to deal with ourselves and work on those things that might be kind of problematic. That's sort of, again, that sort of shadow self that we need to synthesize with our outside self in order to be more complete. So you need to be able to look at, okay, my behavior objectively might have been kind of crappy. Subjectively, you know, I kind of feel good about it because I stood up for myself, sort of thing. I might have come off kind of mean, but this person is mean to me every single day, and I might have come off as mean this way, and that might not have been super great because that might have just perpetuated like the bullying or the meanness, but maybe I felt good about it. But I got to be careful with that because I feel too good about being a butthead too many times, and I'm just going to be just like the person who's abusing me, and that kind of makes me worse to a certain extent. Um, so that's one of the reasons why I talked about this. Wasn't just I didn't see a test where you had to learn aesthetics or aestheticism or anything. I think it's an important thing for us in our lives, and I think it's also important. There we go. That's more of a word because it's especially in 21st century and in the West, we're just bombarded media wise all day, every day with everything. We got phone, computer, TV. Um, Actually, that's like all I got. I don't have tablets. I don't have video games or anything else like that. But a lot of other people do. A lot of people have. They might have their kid. One kid in one room watching TV, another kid in here playing a video game. And if they got a third kid or the parents or something are sitting there on tablets, we're all interacting with all this media. But then you can talk about it. So, I have, you know, everyone be like, oh, you're just a big nerd and everything. Yeah, well, maybe, but everyone's a nerd about something. Really, if you really examine it, there's not really a difference from some guy who's wearing a jersey and painting his face, yelling and screaming and getting all hyped up at a football game, than someone who's dressing up as a character, painting their face, and getting excited going to like Comic Con or something like that. Let's be honest, it's the same behavior. One might be more accepted in the culture than the others, but it's the same behavior. Everyone's a nerd for something. It could be music, it could be sports, it could be video games, it could be a certain type of video game or something like that. It could be psychology. Someone could be like, I'm really obsessed with like Freud and Jung and was it Addison? I forget the person who kind of started analytical psychology before that. They could be really involved with that. So it was almost a big history nerd or anything. Everyone's a nerd for something. But being able to take that and then sort of break it down and think about it and have those discussions with people, or even have that sort of internal discussion with yourself, I think is very, very important because it's a way to learn. It's a way to learn about the way you think. It's the way you learn about how you feel. And how you feel is a function of also kind of how you think, even if it's subconsciously. And those are all things you need to have, again, to be more complete and more healthy. So yeah, it could be you got 2, 3 of your buddies are sitting around and you're sitting there and you're arguing about Star Wars for 2, 3 hours. Or you're talking about how, I'm showing my bias with this a little bit. It's like, oh, how, the Hobbit movies changed all this stuff from the book, and maybe they didn't need to do that, or the way the third season of Twin Peaks ended, and the season was amazing, but there were a couple things that, maybe weren't as satisfying as maybe I wanted to kind of see, and it seemed to me as if they set things up a certain way, but they didn't follow through with it. They did something different, and you can have those conversations. Like I've had really, really sort of amazing conversations with important people in my life that haven't just influenced the way I thought about the movie or the TV show or the song or anything like that, but also influenced the way I started to think or feel in other ways too. And that's, I think, where our relationship with art, whatever you might define art to be, and whatever it is that might be bringing you into that conversation. Again, it could be songs, it could be paintings, it could be movies, and it could be some video games. And everything with that too, because some of those have a lot of effort and work, and some really good writing and storytelling and stuff goes in some of them. I just don't like playing them. But those things can help inform you about you. It can help inform you about the people you're around and choose to spend time with. If you have a significant other and you guys do not agree on movies, TV shows, or books or music at all ever, and it's constantly clashing, I mean, I'm not saying that having a certain difference of opinion isn't good, because you're going to have a difference of opinion. Having differences of opinion is good. But I mean, if it's a constant clash about those things, that could be telling. I'm not saying telling anyone to break up with anyone. It could be telling that there's a certain lack of vibing with that other person. It's always good when the person you're with, you guys can kind of co-nerd together on whatever it might be. Um, and also be aware of that. It's something that you can. It was like, oh, okay, I like, I don't know, maybe I get Star Wars, and I meet a girl who doesn't really know much about Star Wars, but I would say maybe she knows a lot. Really likes. No, I would say Sailor Moon, but I watched a lot of Sailor Moon. Something I can't think of, or a fantasy series of books I haven't read yet. You know, um, It's like, so we might spend time like, all right, well, I'm going to walk you through Star Wars the way I like. She might let me borrow some of the books. So my free time reading the books, and then I can text her talking about the books and everything like that, and asking her questions, and then she can ask me questions about that, and then we can start, again, building different things, and even our philosophies and our feelings about things, and be able to kind of create that in the sort of tapestry of our relationship. And this is something I've always done. If people I care about really care about something, even if I'm not a fan of that thing, and I'm watching it with them, or I'm reading it with them, or I'm listening to it, I will always try and find at least something that I find positive about it, so I can be involved with them with it. Maybe I'm dating a woman and she really likes the show, and I can't stand the show in general, but I'll try and find some characters that I can root for. I'll try and find some stuff that I think is funny, that then could then be, oh, okay, this is going to be like a running gag, so I'm going to say this and everything a bunch of times now, or something like that. It's a way to be able to, have that relation. It could be friends, it could be your mom, could be your dad, could be brothers or sisters. I'm an only child, so I guess you could probably do that with brothers and sisters, significant others, but even just friends, and even yourself. Using those things, even with yourself, can inform yourself about yourself. With that, it's like, oh, okay, I find like I really like violent video games, and I watch a lot of violent movies, and a lot of violent. Okay, or it's like, I do not think that violent media creates violent people. I think people consume that media because there's something about that that appeals to them. I like watching like kung fu movies and stuff because I like martial arts and I like certain things about the different cultures they come from and all that. I like playing martial arts. I like watching good martial arts and stuff like that. And but even watching, violent shoot 'em ups and all this other stuff as a kid, my folks always kind of took me aside and be like, you do realize that this is fiction, right? This can't happen. If someone does they're not going to survive that. Or watching Die Hard when I was a kid or something like that. I was like, you need suspension of disbelief. This isn't real. But being able to have that conversation with that difference between fantasy and reality, being able to know is like, okay, well, if all I watch is fantasy and sci-fi, all I consume is fantasy and sci-fi, all I talk about is fantasy and sci-fi, there might be a certain amount of escapism there. What is it that maybe you're not dealing with in your own life that you're either trying to escape from a process in some way that isn't becoming apparent? So these things, this aesthetics, can be something that is important for your relationships, important for not only learning about yourself, but also enjoying the world. Not everything, it was even Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Sometimes you can just like something to like something. And that's okay if it's like, I don't know why I like this painting. I just really like this painting. That bit from Parks and Recreation where they had that, Tom had that. I don't get it. There's these shapes. I don't know, but I can't stop looking at them. And that's okay too. But as long as it doesn't preclude ever sort of trying to understand yourself. So that went on way longer than I intended it to. But I think there's important stuff to think about in there. So, signing off.